welcome back to part 2 for the Vanity Fair article. We're going to talk about the rest of this article today. Let's just jump in right where we left off. It's hard to imagine how someone who seems so earnestly intent on being kind and engaging in world improving, if also brand building activities, that is just what she thinks her public image should be. That is just her shell, her ego. That's not how she truly thinks or feels. Could wind up engaging in revanchism with people so below her in status. A partial answer might be found in an episode of Archetypes where she interviewed Mindy Kaling, who assumed Meghan was popular as a child. Meghan said, "I never had anyone to sit with at lunch. I was always a little bit of a loner and really shy and didn't know where I fit in. And so I just became like, okay, well, then I'll become the president of this multicultural club and blah, 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 blah." But also, maybe the Meg didn't have a lot of friends because she was always playing weird games. And then she was being involved in clubs and whatnot and voted president of this and vice president of that because it was a way for her to kind of force interactions and have some control over things. This is alarming. This is exactly what communal narcissists do. And she's not even aware that she's doing it because if she was, she wouldn't have said it in a podcast. In other words, Meghan was a good person trying to do good things in spite of and at times because of unkind people. But also, because it was advantageous to her, because it gave her something. It gave her people to control, people to pit against each other, people to create drama between, people to be forced to be around her, and it elevated her status in her mind. At least one employee who had a terrible experience got a handwritten thank you note and a gift from Meghan. Is it any surprise that a sense of victimhood and righteousness could continue to exist in a person who had been treated so horribly? I read this as yet another form of manipulation. If somebody who has had a bad experience, not at your own doing, and you reach out and send them something nice, that's nice. But it's also sort of like putting a deposit into that account so that later when you need them to do something for you or you need them to say something positive about you to the press, then maybe they will. At the same time, if it's somebody who had a negative experience because of something you did and you send them just some vague thank you note and a gift, you're trying to erase that from having happened. It's still self-serving. In an alarming moment, it was revealed that Meghan once called once or twice per day to check in on one of her employees who had just had a baby and their family and was speaking with the husband like almost every day. That is too intense. That's not appropriate. That is not how somebody is supposed to be on maternity leave, constantly getting phone calls. Don't forget, your boss is here wondering how you're doing. Every single day? No, that's super weird. People whom Meghan may have perceived as enemies or interlopers, members of loathsome media, or insiders at the palace, or people who actually knew how to make a podcast, or her pitiable father and half-sister selling her secrets and history to tabloids for cash. They might have seemed more powerful than her in some way, despite her immense fame and wealth and privilege. And then whatever happened to them, well, they shouldn't have gotten between Meghan and her good work. As Harry knows, trauma can warp your perspective. Or really, Meghan is seeing victimhood where it isn't. Meghan is threatened by other people being better at something than her, like Catherine, Princess of Wales, like people who knew how to make content. She finds them threatening and therefore sabotages the situation. It's a hallmark of narcissists. Harry's memoir, written by J.R. Moehringer, which chronicles the prince's lonely former life with MRI-level self-examination that was not always welcome, if not always top-tier self-awareness. Not really. Harry lacks a great deal of self-awareness, and that's the problem. They talk a little bit more about Spare, but I put out a separate video going into this portion of the Vanity Fair article, so I'll just link that for you up here. In addition to painting Dorian Gray-style personal portraits of family members in Spare, Harry accuses the offices of his brother, father, and Camilla of briefing the press against Harry to distract from or trade away negative stories about themselves, which has been denied by everybody, everywhere. That is not how the dynamic goes, and it's a flat-out lie. They also touch on Harry's various lawsuits, including the one demanding greater security and police protection, which he doesn't need. And then there's this quote, "I think with a lot of reporters, they liked the version of Harry that they helped create, describing how they would reminisce about when Harry would come over and pal around with him. Yes, but he also, when you left, would make fun of you all behind your backs and hated you guys. I think this is more accurate. Harry put on a show for the press because it served him. Harry is a narcissistic brat and would, of course, be incredibly cruel behind their backs, which we saw play out in Spare. He attacked Camilla Tominey, who was a well-respected, very talented journalist, and he even attacked and spoke really cruelly about a teacher who he had at school who was disabled. She had a physical disability, and he was just tore to bits in the most cruel of ways in his book. So Harry is a mean man at heart. He just has this nice vibe that serves him well, so he pulls it out whenever it serves him. Narcissism, right there. Who is the real Harry now that he's been released from the zoo in which he was raised? By one telling, the person who interacted professionally with Meghan says he's socially marooned beyond his nuclear family. She was upfront about the fact that Harry hadn't made any friends yet. The source says of Meghan's assessment of her husband. The person who worked in media projects with the couple also has a guess. I think Harry doesn't know what he wants because he grew up in a fishbowl, and so he doesn't know what real life really is. I think he probably wants to be left alone and be able to go kiss babies every once in a while, but not have to worry about money. I don't think he wants to be famous the way Meghan wants to be famous, and there, he would have been better off staying with the royal family, obviously. Harry and Meghan are, in the estimation of everyone Vanity Fair spoke with, deeply in love, which is fine, but we do not need to pretend like demonstrating that you're so hot for each other in front of other people, mostly employees here. Vanity Fair spoke mostly with people who worked with Harry and Meghan in a professional capacity, employees, other people who worked at Spotify and Netflix teams. Okay, these people were around Harry and Meghan while working, and Harry and Meghan gave off the vibe, to some of them at least, that they're hot for each other. A romantic air between them, to say the least. This is yet another power play, manipulation tactic. Being unprofessional in that way and giving off that vibe around employees creates a really weird and uncomfortable space. It's a power play, it's manipulation, it's narcissistic, it's ego-driven, and it's not conducive to a healthy, safe working environment. It's not all right. Just because they're married doesn't mean they should be giving off these sorts of vibes around employees. And then this part of the article is immediately followed up by this paragraph that Harry has explicitly drawn parallels between his wife and his late mother. Yeah, gross, we know. He says he doesn't want to see history repeat itself, but how could it if Meghan would just wear her seatbelt and not have a driver who is drunk? While Harry is vigilant about Meghan's safety, the person, which, let's be clear, is often spurred on or antagonized by the Meg. She often makes comments that would make Harry more anxious, as we saw in Netflix. The person who worked closely with them says Meghan's role in their dynamic is caregiver and facilitator. She's the one who makes things happen. Pre-Meghan, Harry would just pop into the palace press office to ask a few questions and leave like he was a little bored but also very keen. It's almost impossible to imagine today's Harry willingly engaging with the media in search of purpose. The source who worked with Harry and Meghan says, I can picture him meeting Meghan and being just a deep breath of like, I've been so exhausted and you make everything so easy. I don't want to be like, oh, it's an Oedipus thing or whatever, but it kind of feels like she's reparenting him in a way, which is exactly what all of us have been observing and weirded out by. Harry doesn't behave like a grown man a lot of the time, but he is one. Meghan's not doing him any favors, and the people around them aren't doing him any favors by not just letting him figure out how to be a man on his own. Meghan doing this reparenting thing in the Diana cosplay signals something weird and creepy in their personal private lives. And manipulation, at least, on Meghan's part. They have a need to believe in each other and the primacy of their relationship in the face of shared trauma and the real obstacles they encountered as they idealistically endeavored to break the wheel while occasionally breaking the spirits of those tasked with executing their shared vision. You don't tell them no, the person who worked in the couple's media project says. I left because I couldn't live with myself anymore. Ouch. More evidence that Meghan has been lying and manipulating the truth on her experiences all this time, which is something a lot of people could see, that she's very controlling, cares a lot about these sorts of things, cares a lot about how she comes across. She wouldn't have just never looked her husband up online and never had any idea on who the royal family was or what protocols were involved. But yet she claims as such that she's just some clueless lady in Oprah and Netflix. This quote, somebody close to the couple. Meghan is the type of woman who would check a menu out online before going to a restaurant to pick what she was going to eat. So the idea that she didn't know she was supposed to curtsy for the Queen, I just didn't find it particularly believable, because based on everything she ever told us about herself, I cannot imagine that she went into meeting the royal family completely cold with no research whatsoever. Common sense, which Meghan and Harry lack. Or at least they don't think anyone else has any. One Royals reporter believes that Meghan assumed her husband's vision rather than researching the job of being a royal, which I still don't fully believe. I think that Meghan had her own preconceived notions of what it should be based on what she saw in the press growing up with Princess Diana, because she was somewhat obsessed. And then she had Harry, who was telling her certain things, and she was playing at and manipulating towards her own goals of leaving and creating a bigger name for herself. The instinct to do things as Harry and Meghan believed they should be done rather than how they are typically accomplished was exacerbated during their time as senior working royals. It led to conflict with the family, the staff. Because Harry doesn't understand himself, he doesn't understand a monarchy. And they put some of the blame on his family for not teaching him well enough or training him well enough, which I would disagree completely. Harry clearly was kept after quite closely. The palace press office was constantly having to put the pieces back together from Harry's messes and clean up after his public messes. And they very much so trained him towards this work and this life. He was working alongside Catherine and William in kind of their third wheel for many years. Invictus Games for sure is a very clear product, a brand, an organization that Harry spent a decade building with tons and tons of help and the royal team in the beginning. In many ways, I think the Nigerian tour worked, and it didn't. I do not know who this person is. Elaine Louis, the celebrity commentator behind Lainey Gossip, is completely wrong here. The Nigeria tour did not work at all because Meghan mentioned her heritage every single event of the day, multiple times per day, and therefore all the headlines ran with that because it was more sensationalist than Invictus headlines, and so Invictus got almost zero shine during the Nigeria trip. When they appear together in non-Invictus circumstances, that's when people are like, I'm not really clear what they're representing here. Yes, but they're also not clear what Meghan's representing even when she's there for Invictus, because she never wears their branding and she always looks out of place and she inserts herself in ways that doesn't make sense. That's contrasted with an actual royal tours when individuals are acting on behalf of the sovereignty and its various causes, versus an independent actor like Angelina Jolie, who history and the reputation of a very established philanthropic organization to say, hey, I'm lending my celebrity to this cause, and in raising awareness, we can actually attach the effect or the results to the UNHCR. True, she has a very good balance to her public-facing role through those efforts and through those initiatives that she has been supporting for many years. With the gauzier parts of Harry and Meghan's tours, what Harry called the reasons to meet people at the heart of our work, Louise says, the question is, how are they helping anyone, and how is Archewell distinguishing itself from any other foundation? After raising more than $13 million in 2021, according to public disclosure forms, the charity grossed $2 million in 2022. So donations dropped by $11 million. The nonprofit has not yet shared its 2023 or 2024 revenue. Yes, Archewell has Harry and Meghan as spokespeople, but they haven't had yet, because it's still quite new, a track record of being able to make philanthropic achievements independent of the palace. And largely because they're not actually being smart about it. It's all so vain. How complete that independence is another point that rankles people about Harry and Meghan. If you still use a title and descend upon Commonwealth or developing countries and let little girls curtsy to you as one did to Meghan in Colombia, it doesn't seem like you've totally left the monarchy behind. It also doesn't give you a lot of room to critique it, which Harry and Meghan have spent years doing. The Netflix series litigates in painstaking detail Harry and Meghan's mental health declines as she was bullied, at the very least in sight of, and by many accounts at the behest of, the establishment, which is a manipulated take on what actually happened. Yet this doesn't seem to sour the idea of participating in a hereditary bloodline, as Harry and Meghan are still taking titles and using them to their advantage and pulling on that for their stardust, basically, because without that, they don't have much traction at all. We could have carried on doing this for the rest of our lives, Harry said in the documentary, that he and Meghan liked everything about it except the media coverage, basically, not getting to do things their way, not getting to take interviews and tell-alls for profit. Harry's book tour said they were instructed to address the couple as sir or ma'am. Many members of Meghan's current inner circle are basically living by the rules of American aristocracy, which doesn't exist. They stay behind the scenes and wield their power quietly, look down on people who are very public or too thirsty, which is exactly how Meghan comes across. Very public and far too thirsty for attention. Then they interviewed a Black Studies scholar who was critical of the way Harry and Meghan approached the dynamics in the Harry and Meghan Netflix documentary. The couple repeatedly expressing frustration that Meghan wasn't tapped as an asset for upholding the crown's international interests in an era when Prince William was tasked with expressing profound sorrow for the appalling atrocity of slavery during a tour to Jamaica. Harry speaks shortly after and says the palace and its denizens have already missed an enormous opportunity with my wife and how far that would go globally. Source familiar with the couple says it's important to note that Harry isn't an anti-monarchist. He just didn't like the way things were run within the institution. His issues are about people and behaviors, not tradition. The source, who is also a person of color, defends Meghan's right to want a piece of the empire for herself. If I was in the same position and I was treated the way I was by the institution, it wouldn't stop me from feeling that the title is mine and deserved. If anything, it would feel like you're giving in to the pressure to exclude you in the first place. So actually, it would probably make me want it even more. But at the same time, Harry and Meghan have continued carrying on criticizing the royal family and criticizing lots of things about the UK in general. And so it all comes across hypocritical, which is sort of lost in this part of the Vanity Fair article. They just kind of breeze over the hypocrisy involved in that dynamic there. When talking about Montecito and the community there, a source who lives in Montecito says, I think everyone, including the A-list celebs, would prefer that it's not on the map like it is. It's a place where no one would ever bother a famous person beyond saying hello at the coffee shop, as they would to anyone else. One resident says Montecito's defining characteristics are quiet and neighborliness. The prince and the starlet, as the Montecitan calls her, have become local villains, according to several people who spoke with Vanity Fair. They attribute the increase in housing prices to them as much as DeGeneres doing flips in the area, and point to out-of-towners coming in, driving too fast, taking up all the street parking by local trails, like the one Meghan was photographed hiking on while Harry was in the UK for Charles's coronation. You can't just walk into Lucky's for dinner anymore. The people of Montecito aren't real jazzed with Harry and Meghan's over-the-top behaviors, including their excessive car convoys roaring around town. Especially when you think about this network of people who are very wealthy, very famous, have very famous faces, not living that way there. Just how odd, pretentious, out of touch, and bizarre it must seem for Harry and Meghan to be living the way they are in Montecito. Like, what are you even doing? And this resident interviewed, along with a few other, agree that the American Riviera Orchard Montecito thing is contradictory also for this reason. It's just finding every way she can to monetize something, and in doing so, bringing more attention to the place where the Sussexes say they want to be left alone. I still think they are the most entitled, disingenuous people on the planet, the Montecitan says. They moved away from England to get away from scrutiny of the press, and all they do is try and get in the press in the United States. The most common criticism they hear about Meghan, though it's true of Harry as well, is you can't cherry pick the good parts and leave out the bad parts of fame. All celebrities do this. Don't take photos of me, but oh, here, let me step out conveniently and get papped. Only give me good reviews of my movie or my album. And if you don't like my music, I'm going to post on Instagram that you're so shitty as a reviewer. Yes, but at the same time, Harry and Meghan aren't really putting out products or art that people can have opinions on and review. Harry and Meghan are just sort of wayward and expecting only positive coverage for not really doing much. Then they touch on the challenges that American Riviera Orchard Montecito has had, and this source says that, to me, it's giving 2014. It's not giving 2024. Exactly. The branding alone is super outdated and not on trend. Fame arrests you at the moment it arrives, and I wonder if that is your health and wellness lifestyle version of that, where she had to suspend the TIG and quit it the moment she became Harry's girlfriend, then fiancé, and then his wife, and this is maybe picking up where the TIG left off. Maybe, but is there an appetite for that these days? I don't think so. A few years ago, a rumor began circulating around the book world about another prospective project for Meghan. This story, which a person with knowledge confirms, the broad details of was that Meghan's team had a conversation with the publishing house to gauge interest for the idea for a potential book. The concept, for which there was no written formal proposal, was post-divorce. Not a general book on life after marital dissolution or one about Meghan's past experience. This book, this notion of a book really, might center on a post-Harry divorce. Not that there was actually one in the works. Just if they ever did get divorced, would the publisher theoretically be interested in a book that took place in its aftermath? Another source with knowledge says, if that's true to any degree, she would have been approached and not vice versa. No offer was ever made and no manuscript ever produced. After all, there was no divorce. However, other people have suggested that they did float the idea. So here, Vanity Fair is being honest that they have gotten two sides to this story, that no, probably not, and that yes, the idea was floated. What do you think? A source familiar for the couple lists all the failed projects and why she's better suited to celebrity outside the palace. The royals don't work like that. How many years has Kate been talking about early childhood development? Like 11, now 12 years? They say, we still haven't really seen anything, this source says, but they're completely wrong. Shaping Us is a campaign focused on increasing public understanding of the crucial importance of the first 5 years of a child's life. And over those 11, 12 years, they have been doing research this entire time to gain data on what will most help families to create better communities and better outcomes for their children. Better communities to support the children and better outcomes for the children in the first 5 years. And that's where they pinpointed ages 0 to 5 as being some of the most crucial and where the most amount of support is needed. And they have proposed some changes and they have gathered large businesses, including Lego and a few others, to find ways to be more accommodating to parents of ages 0 to 5 and more child-friendly in their businesses, like their grocery stores and whatnot, for ages 0 to 5 specifically, to brainstorm ways that they can be better communities for our babies. So actually, she's done a lot, and it's been very, very effective and excellent research that has been a huge contribution to the subject and the general field of early childhood development. A lot of celebrities or just known people have publicly discussed Meghan unexpectedly reaching out during difficult times in their lives and offering solace, even though they weren't close. Louis sees it as something Meghan took from her royal years, just as Harry has taken his impeccable manners and the ability to patronize a charity. That's what they do. They bless you with their royalness. That's the gift. It's not like Princess Diana was ever best friends with all the people that she visited in the hospital. But at the same time, this day and age, the same type of thing doesn't work. The same type of dynamics don't work anymore. Celebrity is an entirely different ball game. Being famous is an entirely different ball game than it was in the 90s. Now with social media and people being able to film everything all the time, and the access to information is so much greater. I think they don't know what change the world means, says the person who worked in media projects. They want to be the people who are looked at as people who want to change the world. Maybe that's why she keeps bringing up the dish soap story. But just because that's what their aspirations are on paper doesn't mean that they are actually taking it seriously enough to impose real change or to create real change or to make a difference in any way, shape, or form. The problem is, as we have seen, that Harry and Meghan undermine their efforts far more often than they support and elevate their own efforts. They tend to shoot themselves in the foot. If Harry's burden is the soft oppression of no expectations, Meghan's might be the opposite, the betrayal of not living up to an unachievable ideal. I think the whole world was waiting for her to be that person, and then she never jumped. The source who worked in media says Diana walked amongst the landmines. Meghan couldn't even say the word slut. A very good final line, and kind of encapsulates that problem with Harry and Meghan. That at the end of the day, their dreams, their words, none of it really matters if they can't actually execute. And that is what we have seen 5 years on, a lack of execution of any of it, really, on both Harry and Meghan's part, as well as a lot of narcissistic, toxic behavior. So at the end of the day, these are two rich whiners that are super narcissistic and toxic. And even if they were to try to follow up with their idealistic images and motivations and lofty goals, At the end of the day, it's clear that all of that would just be for the image, for the clout, because those other two elements of lack of substance and ability to execute, the toxic narcissisticness behind it all, would outweigh any good that they would potentially do. Regardless, this article was definitely maybe a little bit too long, and it was definitely not painting Harry and Meghan in a good light, backing up a lot of the previous article. But leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for joining me for today's video. I hope you have a happy day ahead, and I will see you next time. Bye.